Welcome to Build Your First Report with SQL Server Reporting Services. My name is Jess Borland, a consultant with Brent, Ozar Unlimited. I'm a Microsoft certified professional in querying and administering SQL Server 2012. I'm a SQL Server MVP. I'm a co-author of Pro SQL Server 2012 practices. And my introduction to SQL Server came with Reporting Services 2005. I'd just taken my first How to Write SQL Queries class in college. We had a backlog of report requests and the DBA asked me to help. I said yes. He installed SQL Server Reporting Services 2005 on my computer and off I went. Several years and hundreds of reports later, I'm here to help you build your first report. Whether you are a DBA looking to monitor, or whether you are a DBA looking to report on some of the metrics you've collected about your server, or if you are an analyst looking to get some information for the business, I'm here to help you understand the basics of reporting services. Let's first talk about what it is. Reporting services encompasses the entire server-based reporting platform for SQL Server. It's available in nearly every edition of SQL Server 2012. It isn't just one tool though. It really covers everything from the engine to the server, the central database, the report authoring tools, and the delivery mechanisms. So this is a very, very wide topic that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But what I want to do today is to get you up and running, being able to build and publish your first report with an existing reporting services installation. It takes a very small amount of time to understand the basic building blocks and put them together to create a functional, reliable, easy to use report. The first thing that you'll need to understand is the different authoring tools that you have available. As of SQL Server Reporting Services 2012, you have two options, Report Designer and Report Builder 3.0. Report Designer is available in the Visual Studio shell, which is currently called SQL Server Data Tools, previously called Business Intelligence Development Studio, or BIDS. This is part of the SQL Server installation media. This is what you would get if you installed the client tool, so that's what I'll be focusing on today. If you've done any programming whatsoever with .NET or C#, or if you've built any SQL Server integration service packages, this is going to look really familiar to you. Your other option, Report Builder 3.0, is a download from Microsoft. This is a tool that has more of an office look and feel. It has the ribbon across the top with the buttons. It has all of the same functionality. It just looks a little bit different. You can use either, but again, I will be using Report Designer. So what are the basic building blocks of a SQL Server Reporting Services report? Before you even think about showing your data in the form of a table or a chart, what you need to think about are your data source, your data set, and your parameters. The data source describes where you're getting the data from. What server are you connecting to? What database or file are you connecting to? You have a host of options for the data source type. Most frequent would probably be a SQL Server database, but you can also connect to a Windows Azure SQL database, an Oracle database. You can use OLEDB or ODBC, so you have a lot of options. You'll see here the connection properties window. You'll enter your server name, you'll enter your authentication, and then you'll see a list of databases that you have authorization to use. So picking your data source is the first option. And note that you can have multiple data sources per report. If you need to pull in information from more than one database or more than one server, it's very possible to do that. Then you're going to specify what your data set is. This determines what information you want to see in the report that is coming from that data source. It's going to be in the form of a text query. You'll write your own T-SQL, or you can even execute a stored procedure. They both have pros and cons. A stored procedure means that the logic is all encapsulated in one place. Multiple reports could use it, and if there's any change to the logic, you only need to change it in one place. But in some environments, depending on what your source control and your change control look like, it may be easier just to put together a query and use it. If it's just a one-off report that you know will only be used once, again, a one-off may work. Again, you can have multiple data sets per report. So if you want to see information from one database in various ways, you can build various data sets. Understand that the data set that you write is the most important part of the report. You can have the prettiest report with the most charts and spark lines and graphs, but if your data set is not pulling back accurate information, it's a useless report. Your data set needs to return only the data that the users need displayed on the report. No more and no less. If you're returning more data, if you're selecting all rows from the table without doing any sort of filtering, or you're selecting from tables that you don't necessarily need information from, you're pulling back too much information. It's going to take too long to execute that and too long to render it. And nobody's going to flip through a 63-page report, trust me. If you pull back too little data, however, or don't give the user enough filtering options, it could result in an incomplete picture. You could potentially give the user incorrect assumptions. This could lead to bad business decisions. This could lead to you having to do more work and write more reports, neither of which you want. Thus, the most important thing about your report is going to be the data set that you build. Now, I've mentioned filtering your report. How do you do that? With parameters. Much like in a stored procedure, you would add a parameter for example, the year, and then you would say where order year equals at year, and it would return only the results from the table that match that. In reporting services, you can add parameters, and this allows the user at the top of the report to filter the data from the data set down even further. You can have multiple parameters per report. They can be used in one or more data set, and they can even be cascading. So if you wanted to have a user select report all of the orders from March of 2013 by client, rather than giving them a list of all clients to choose from, regardless of whether or not they ordered in that time period, you could set up a parameter for 2013 and then a parameter for the month 3. And then you could filter down using a parameter only the clients that have ordered in those months. Parameters are very flexible. It's great to become familiar with them. So after you've determined where your data is coming from, and after you've built an accurate, reliable data set, and you've determined what to filter it on, then you can talk about displaying the data. You have a lot of options for doing this. There is the Tablix. Now, I admit I was confused when this initially came out. It was first mentioned in SQL Server Reporting Services 2008, and as soon as I was able to download and install my preview of that, I ran out there, I looked in the toolbox, and I went, I don't see a Tablix. I still see a table, and I still see a matrix, and I still see a list, but where is this magic Tablix? The Tablix is just a generic term for the 3. The reason that they're grouped together is you now have the ability to turn a table into a matrix into a list, and vice versa, something that wasn't available before that. You also have a lot of visualizations. You can add charts, gauges, spark lines, and more. If you have spatial data, you can add maps, adding really full-featured, rich reports. And you can even have text boxes and images. Images can come from the database or from other sources. All right, so let's go ahead and dig into the meat of this. Let's go ahead and look at building your first report. So I have a SQL Server 2012 box. I have 2 queries. I have one that is going to return sales by sales territory, year, and month. And I have another query that is going to return my individual territories. To start building my report, I'm going to go to my Start menu, go to All Programs, open Microsoft SQL Server 2012, and click on SQL Server Data Tools. You'll notice it says Visual Studio 2010 Shell. Again, it's built on Visual Studio. The first thing you'll need to do is either open or start a project. All Visual Studio, all methods of using Visual Studio involve projects where you have multiple solutions within them. Reports are no different. I'm going to open my existing project, SSRS Properties. What we'll notice is that over on the right, I have my Solution Explorer. So this is my solution name. I have shared data sources, shared data sets, and existing reports. Over on the left, I'll have my toolbox. And when I create a new report, I'll have further information over there as well. To create a report, I can either come to Project and say Add New Item, or I can right-click Reports and select Add New Report or Add New Item. What's the difference? If I click Add New Report here, it's going to open up the wizard. The wizard can be useful. You're going to fill in all of the same information, a data source, a data set, what fields you want displayed on the report, and then some nonsensical things like what colors you want. However, I find that when I use the wizard, I usually end up coming through and completely revamping my report anyway. So I prefer to just go Add New Item, add a new report. First thing we'll need to do is give it a name. And we're going to say Sales by Territory, Year, Month. And click Add, and it's going to open up a new blank slate, a new report. Again, I like this method because I can start from scratch, start from the very basics, and add things on as necessary. It gives you better control. So again, the first thing that we need to determine is our data source. Where are we getting our data from? We have two options. We can use a shared data source, or we can add our own data source. Shared data sources are nice because when they are published to the website in the end, they can be used amongst multiple reports. This is really handy if anything about your data source changes. For example, you move servers, you change authentication. If you have built-in data sources, if anything were to change, you might have to change it in more than one place. I prefer to use shared data sources. So I am going to come to New and select Data Source. My name for it will be the database I am getting this from, so AdventureWorks 2012. I do not want to use an embedded data source. I want to use a shared data source. If I click this drop-down arrow, you'll notice it matches the shared data sources listed in my Solution Explorer. I select AdventureWorks 2012. If I want to see it, I can click Edit, and I will see the connection string that's been built. This is on my local machine. AdventureWorks 2012 is the database. So now I have my first data source added. Next, I need to add in my data sets. So I'm going to select New Data Set. This one I'm going to name Sales. I don't want to use a shared data set. This is the same concept. I could create a shared data set and then publish it out, and multiple reports could use it. This is absolutely a great idea. This is something that can be useful in lieu of stored procedures, for example. In this case, however, I am going to embed the data set in this particular report. For the data source, I'm going to pick AdventureWorks 2012, which is already tied to this report. And for my query, I'm going to highlight the query I wrote here, Copy and paste. And you'll notice I have a data set listed, and it lists the individual fields that are returned. I want to add a second data set as well, this one for territories, so I have that information available to me. This will also be embedded. It will also have an AdventureWorks 2012 data set. And I'm going to copy and paste that query over as well. So now I have my data source and I have my data sets. I want to display the sales on the report in a simple table. To access the table, the matrix, the list, the charts, I come to the Toolbox tab here. I click on the table and I simply drag it over. You'll notice that I have header and data rows. The first thing I'll need to do is tie this particular table to one of my data sets. So I select the table and I come to the Properties tab. I make sure that I go to the Data Set Name property and select Sales. Now what I want to do is get my field into the detail row. I want my territory name, so I can do this a couple different ways. I can click and drag, but that involves a lot of work because I have to, drag. Or I can simply click in the text box that I want, and this icon will appear in the top right corner. And I can simply select the field that I want, year. I select order month name because I want to see the name, not the number, and I'm out of columns. Easy, I simply right click, select insert column, and select right, and another column appears. I'm going to select the order totals. That's the most basic table I could make. Let's take a look at it. When I click the preview tab at the top, it will generate a preview of the report. You'll notice it's loading, and now I have my territory name, the order year, the order month, and the order totals. So it's organized it by year, by month, by territory, and then order totals. There's a lot of things that aren't pretty about this. For example, order totals is a very decimal-like number, and I would like that to be in currency. And I'd like the headers to stand out a little bit more. These are some simple formatting and design changes. You simply control them through the properties. So I'm going to go back to design. I'm going to select the field I want to change. First, order totals. I come to properties. The property I'm looking for is format. I want to show this with a $sign. That's the currency format, which is abbreviated C. Let's just go to preview and check that out. That's very easy to check. Now I want my headers to be bold, and I want them to be underlined. I can use the formatting bar at the top to change that. I'll make a bottom border. Again, a very simple, easy change to make. What if I decide, though, that the format of the data itself isn't very pretty? Perhaps I want to show the territory name, and underneath that I want to see the year and the month, and then the order totals. I want it to be grouped by territory. That's easy enough. I can add row and column groups to the table by coming down to the row groups, column groups pane. So note that the details row is specified with these 3 horizontal lines to the left that matches the 3 horizontal lines that are in the detail row of the table. This is the minimal level, or this is the lowest level of detail that you can reach within any given report. So I want to add a group. I simply click on the drop down arrow next to details. I say add group, and I specify parent group. I want this group to be above the detail row. I want to group by name or by territory name. I also want to make sure I add a group header. This makes it easy to add things like subtotals later. Now you'll notice that there is a new column called name. There's also a new row, but it left the old name. Let's look what that looks like. You'll see now it's grouped by Australia, and Australia is repeated, then Canada, then Central, and so on. Maybe I only want the group name to appear in the header, so I can easily get rid of an unnecessary column by right-clicking the column header and selecting Delete Columns. Now if I look at it, my name is only repeated once. Now I want to do the same thing for order year. I just want to see all of the months for 2005, 2006, etc. grouped together. That's very easy to do as well. I simply need to add another group. How do I do that? This time I'm going to click the down arrow next to the group name and select Add Group. This time I select Child Group. I want this one to be under name. This time I want the group to be the order year, and I want to add a group header again. You'll notice now that name is at the top, order year is below it, and then we have our detail row. The same thing has happened here again, where the order year column has been repeated, so I will right click the order year at the detail row and delete it. Now our report is starting to look much better. We can see Australia in 2005, Australia in 2006, Australia in 2007, so on and so forth. But it doesn't help much if I can't see what the totals are per year and per territory so that I can compare them. It's very easy to add aggregations in your table, matrix, or list. If I have a detail row and then I have a group above it, by simply clicking in the field that I want to add the aggregation to and selecting what I want to aggregate, for example, order totals, it will automatically add a sum. I'm going to do this at the year and at the name level. Now remember, one thing I did previously was to format these as currency, so I'm going to do the same thing. Now let's look at it and we can see, excellent. Over the course of all of the years, Australia had $10.6 million US in sales. We can see that Canada had $16.3 million US in sales. Central had $7.9 million. So that is a very easy way to add headers and aggregations. You can do it right there, no additional work necessary. So this is coming along quite nicely, but now let's say that I want the user to be able to choose what territory they want to see, or which territories they want to see. This comes down to that filtering I had talked about earlier, or adding parameters. So this is a two-step process. First, you need to add your parameter, and then you need to apply it to your data set. So first thing I will do is click on New Parameter. This will open the report parameter properties. So I'm going to put in a name and a prompt. The difference is the name is what you will see listed here and what you will refer to in your data set. Prompt is what the user sees. So I'm going to call this territory name, and for the prompt I'm going to say please enter or please select a territory. I can have several different types of parameters. I'm going to leave this one at text. I could choose to allow blank or null values. I'm not going to on this report, but I do want to set allow multiple values. The available values option is very important here. Why is that? Because it helps you determine where the user is going to get the values for the parameter. We have three options: none, specify values, or get values from a query. None means that the user is just going to see a blank box at the top and they will have to type in their own option. If it doesn't match something that's in the database exactly, they'll get an error. They won't get any results. If you say specify values, you have to hard code the list of values. This might be useful if you have a very limited list, something numeric like the months. You always have 1 through 12. But if it's anything that could change over time, it's better to use dynamic values from a query. In this case, you can use a data set to populate a parameter, and that's what my territories data set is for. So I want to select territories. My value field is what field in the territories data set will I compare to a field in the sales data set. Here I'm going to compare name to name. I could compare ID to ID, for example. Label field is what the user will see. So if you would prefer to compare, if your sales data set said where territory ID equals 7, so your territories data set needs to have an ID, generally the users would have no idea what territory 7 is, so I want to set their label field to name. All right, let's go ahead and look at what that looks like now. Great, I see the label, please select a territory. If I click the drop down, I see all of my territories as returned by the territories data set. What if I want to select a couple, Northeast and Northwest, for example? I click View Report, and I still see Australia and Canada and Central. Like I said, this is a two-step process. First, I have to add the parameter, then I have to go into my data set and filter it. So I'll double-click on sales, and what I need to do is come into my where clause and add in the parameter. So now I'm going to say where, I already have the date set, and I want to say that the st.name, that's the field in my data set, is in the territory name. Why do I say in? Because I had selected allow multiple values. Let's look at this now. Again, let's select Northeast and Northwest as our territories and click View Report. And here we have it. We have the Northwest, or the Northeast territory, and the Northwest territory. So that's adding parameters. Very easy, very useful. Again, if you're going to be using the multiple values option, make sure that you set your data set to use where, in. Now, last but not least, let's say we have this very functional report, but you don't want to always come into Report Designer here in SQL Server Data Tools and run it from here. That's going to take a lot of time. And what if you're at home and you just don't want to boot up the entire system? What if you want other users to be able to view this report? What you want to do is be able to publish or deploy the report out to the reporting services homepage. This is the website. Any data sets you publish, any folders you create, any reports will be published out here. So how do we go about getting a report out on the website? The first thing we need to do is come to our solution, right-click on the name of it, and select Properties. Under Configuration Properties General, you need to check first your target server URL. Make sure that you're deploying to the correct report server. If you are publishing a new data source, instead of using a shared data source, make sure that it is being published to the correct data source folder. Then you want to check your target report folder and make sure you're publishing to the correct folder. In this case, I want to publish to this SSRS properties folder, not admin reports, not anything else. I click OK. Then in my list of reports, I find the one that I just wrote, which is here. I right click and I select Deploy. Down in the lower left, it tells me Deploy started. This can take some time depending on how busy the report server is, how big of a report it is. If there are any problems, it will report errors back to you. Hopefully, we don't get any this time. What it's doing is it's going ahead and it's publishing that a .rdl, which is an XML file, out to the web service. The report will be added to the report catalog, which is stored in the report server database on your reporting services server. Looks like this one is still going. Let's go ahead and pop, and it is ready. Okay. While that deploy failed because of a naming reason, you can see that I made my name too long, or I have commas in the name, a much more likely problem. I can view an existing similar report out here. I come into the SSRS properties folder and I click on sales by territory. Now, in this case, my Internet Explorer, because it's running on a server, doesn't like me running scripts. Normally users will not run into this problem. But what I can see is what the user would see in the end. I select pick a territory. Again, I can select one or more just like I could in my report designer. I'm going to select the territories I would like to see a report for. Click on view report, and it's going to load up the information for me just as I saw it previously. And that is how you go about building and deploying your first reporting services report. It's actually very simple as long as you follow consistently the date that you need a data source, you build a reliable, accurate data set, you can add filtering, and then you visualize. Again, for publishing, you want to go to configuration options. Within reporting services, there is so much more to explore. From a matrix, which is similar to a pivot table, to the visualizations, maps, other advanced properties, adding in expressions, administering the reports. So take the time to start really digging into and understanding reporting services. If you have any questions, please contact me.